Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Robert Moss, and Robert describes himself as a dream teacher. Robert, you've taught dreams internationally for many years now, I think, and you're the author of many books, Dreamways of the Iroquois, Conscious Dreaming, Dreaming Our Way Home, and your latest book is called Growing Big Dreams. So welcome, Robert.
Thank you, John. Good to be dreaming with you in the part of Australia where I was conceived. I was conceived in the Ritz Hotel in Perth at the end of World War II, according to my parents. So it's good to be with you, even if only virtually.
That's just down the road, actually. Not so
There we
far
are.
from me, 10 minutes from me, Robert.
There we are.
I would like to just talk to you a little bit about your beginning, because I think you also grew up early days in Queensland, and that's when you, in a sense, began to have some dreams. So in a moment, I'd like to talk to you about that. But um, I've just been dreaming. There we go. There was a Freudian slip. Reading.
You're dreaming right now, John. We're dreaming right now. We're dreaming in what seems to be physical reality, but dreaming peoples would say you and I are dreaming right now.
That's true. And I would like to speak to you about. I mean, I've learned a lot from your book, Dreamways of the Iroquois, and I love the way your research, the way you're approaching that opens up through Indigenous culture, through how important dreams were to people, how they shared their dreams, and hopefully somewhere we can start to talk about that as well, amongst other things.
Perhaps we might begin, if I might suggest this, with my visit to Western Australia when I was 3 years old. Would you like to hear this story?
Yes,
This is the
please.
sense where it all begins. My mother's family came from West Australia. She was born in Kalgoorlie. Her
Yep.
aunt was a pretty well-known opera singer, a coloratura soprano, Nellie Melba's friend and understudy,
Yeah.
living in Perth as a music teacher in retirement. And my mum said, let's go and meet my family. I'm 3 years old. So we take the trains. And in those days, it was still the same, you've got to change trains at every state line because the gauge changes, etc. So eventually we get to Perth.
Mm.
And we're at Auntie Dick's house. We called her Auntie Dick. I don't know why. And she's giving us advice on breathing and getting our voices right. Breathe from the diaphragm, Robert, darling. Okay. And then she does something which she did on the QT. She sort of reads the tea leaves. She's a very gifted, psychic medium. Doesn't make a fuss about it, but does it for some very interesting people.
Was
And
she
on this
just
day,
just one thing, Robert? Was she Irish?
yes, Irish, yes, Irish. This is the Irish side of my family, of
Yeah.
course, yes.
I,
And so she's doing the tea leaves, and she does it for my mum, and she says whatever she says, I don't know. She looks at my tea leaves, turns white, leaves the room, will not speak. Well, we go back to the East Coast. We go down to Tasmania. My father was an army officer. His posting is to Hobart. I get pneumonia in both lungs, and I'm pronounced clinically dead in hospital in Hobart, age 3. I've died. I come back. The doctors say, my mother told me this much later, they say with some embarrassment, oh, your boy, he died and he came back, didn't he? So I died and came back. And the point is, my mother's aunt, the opera singer, had seen it. And at that point, she opened up. She saw my death. She didn't see me coming back. And maybe I wasn't quite the same, because I can't tell you much about what happened to me when I was 3 years old, except it was very difficult operating this body for the years afterwards, like driving a car. My father had an old Holden back in those days. It's like trying to drive the old Holden and your feet don't reach the pedals. I had a hard time operating in my body, and I kept getting pneumonia. It was almost as if I didn't want to be in a body. And then at age 9 came the big change, or the big opening up, the big awakening. At 9, I have another crisis. I say to my father, I feel a bit crook. We're in Melbourne at the time. And my dad, who's an army officer but is sensitive to his son's needs, rushes me to the hospital in an ambulance right away. I just say, I feel a bit crook. And they say, oh, his appendix was about to explode. Had you brought him any later, he would have died. So it's an emergency appendectomy. And under the knife, I'm doing what we now regard as a classical NDE, near-death experience thing. So we didn't have the name back then. We didn't have Raymond Moody.
Yeah.
I'm just under the ceiling and I'm looking at the blood and the knives and the surgery and the nurses gossiping. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be here. And so I go down the hall. I've forgotten about the body already in the operating room. There's my mum crying, and I feel bad. I'm an only child. I feel guilty for making her so sad. I don't want to get out of there. And I look out the window and I see what any 9-year-old kid would want to do. There's the beach. There's Luna Park. And without thinking about it, I'm going through the window, and I still remember it feels like toffee stretching. Something of me that is in motion, that is outside the physical, goes through the window. I go through the moon, the moon face of Luna Park just for fun. I go through the mouth of the big moon face, and I'm going to do what a kid wants to do, look at the girls in their summer frocks, go on the ghost train. Whoops. I go on the ghost train, and suddenly I'm in a different world. Beautiful people, very elongated, very pale, very welcoming family. They take me in. They welcome me. I'm with my own. And they raise me, and I forget that I've got a body in a hospital in Melbourne. And I live with them, and I grow up, and I become some kind of shaman, it seems, and a father and a grandfather, and have a full life. And then it's time to leave, and I assume I'll be going to that star. But no, I'm back in the body of a 9-year-old boy in an operating room who's been pronounced clinically dead again.
Yeah.
And I remember. So this was a turning point. This time I remember. I remember the things that happened at 3. I can't tell you what happened when I was out there. This time I remember. And this is a bit of a problem. My parents are good people, but they're conservative Australians back in the 1950s. How do you deal with a kid who says he's been in some other world with these tall, spooky characters? And they asked the doctors. The doctor said, oh, well, it's a medication. Maybe he's having hallucinations. So I have this knowledge that from my point of view, there's another world, and I've been in it, and I've lived there, and I've come back, and I'm different. I'm not the same. And I can't talk safely. I start talking to a friend at school. That doesn't go well. And anyway, I'm an army brat. We keep changing towns and changing friends and so on. The first person I remember I could really talk to about this safely was an Aboriginal kid. And I wasn't supposed to hang out with him. It was a very racist period. You know what it was like.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to hang out with Abos.
Yeah.
But Jacko, as I remember his name, I'm not absolutely 100% sure now that was the name, but I remember it as Jacko. He'd listen to me. Oh, yeah, we do that. We get sick. We die, we live with the spirits for a while, we come back. Sometimes we're the same and sometimes we're not.
Robert,
So
can I say something there that I was thinking this morning, that, I grew up in the country of Western Australia with farmers, and it was about being practical. Being a bit of a dreamer probably wouldn't be the best look, or a bit alternate. But there were Aboriginal kids around, lots of Aboriginal kids, and there was, thinking about it, although I wasn't conscious of it at the time, there was things going in by osmosis, because whilst some of the story might have been lost,
yes,
I think it was the Wong guy was the kind of medicine man figure, what you would call the shaman, that those kids often talk. So there were bits and fragments and alternative reality. So what I'm trying to say is it's ironic in Australia that that practical side of Australia, that conservative practical side that was there so much, but the whole basis has been on the dreaming, the whole foundation of Aboriginal Australia.
Yes.
It's like that's just being awakened now.
Yes.
More.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I've read those early Australian anthropologists, some of whom were very good-hearted and were well aware of the crimes that have been committed to the Aborigines. People like Elkin and Burnt and Stanner and so on. And one of them, I think it was Burnt, said, these people have cathedrals, but they're invisible to whites. They're cathedrals of a different kind, cities and cathedrals of a different kind.
Yeah.
Actually, I was laughing the other day because I've been revisiting some of my Australian roots and some of the Australian history in relation to the Indigenous. And I was reading about how Elkin, the famous A.P. Elkin, still known today for Aboriginal men of high degree, his book on the clever men, the spirit men, how he
Clever.
got his in with Aboriginal elders. He was going north of Broome up into the Kimberleys, and he was hoping to establish, a connection with elders. And they were sort of sniffing him and not sure about him. And then the word got around that at night, Elkin, the anthropologist, shapeshifted, became a clever man, and hopped around in the form of a tree frog. He wrote about this to his wife, Sally. I mean, I've read the letter. And he wrote to the professor of anthropology at Sydney University, his boss, saying, since then, they've been much more receptive. They're inviting me to see their secret places, their places of initiation. So it's helpful to Elkin, the anthropologist, to be regarded as somebody who did their thing. And there are a lot of tree frogs up in that part of the world, as you probably know. And apparently they have some particular role in shamanic practice and belief. I was laughing at that. What you said about osmosis is very important to me. Very important to me, John, because I am an absentee Australian, very proud
Yep.
of being Australian. I spent most of my life outside the country. But
Yep.
I dreamed the other day, not long ago, within the last couple of weeks, that Manning Clark, remember him? He
Yep.
was my professor and great patron and friend at the ANU in Canberra, Australian National University. We're very good mates. He is very, very kind and helpful to me in my early life. I dreamed he was now Prime Minister of Australia. In the dream, I'm thinking, I've got to get in touch. Manning is Prime Minister of Australia. I've got to get back in touch with my native country. And I woke up, he died in 1991 or 1993, something like that. I woke up thinking, okay, all right, let's go symbolic on this. If Manning is the head of government, then maybe my internal head of government is saying, don't forget your Australian roots, get in touch. And so since then, I've been spending a lot of time being in touch, getting in touch with Aussie friends and connections, and reading up a storm, because there's been so much interesting participatory anthropology done in recent years with anthros who broke the glass and there've been a lot of indigenous voices being
Yes.
heard in Australia. But to
Many.
go back to your osmosis remark, I realized that in my life, the Aboriginal knowledge of the dreaming, and this is the oldest tradition, isn't it? The Aboriginal knowledge of the dreaming in some sense lives with me. And some big life-changing dreams in my life later on reflect that and gave me a passport to one Aboriginal people in physical reality, which I could not have otherwise had.
Yeah.
So I've been feeling increasingly respectful and grateful for that connection with the first peoples of my native country.
And Robert, the other thing is that I'd like to mention is, with your sickness, it's a bit of a theme for people with a shamanic bent, maybe, isn't it?
Yes.
That often there is, I've been thinking lately of the word permeability. Like you seem to be quite permeable to me. Jung was a very permeable person in terms of, between the two worlds, let's say. But often it seems to be what's the word? Kick-started. Permeability is kick-started by illness. Perhaps it's there anyway, but the illness seems to.
There's a word for this in the Xhosa language of Southern Africa, tuasa. Tuasa is the calling illness. The
Right.
calling illness, tuasa. And to become a sangoma, actually, that's the Zulu word. The Xhosa word is a bit more difficult, and I won't attempt it right now. But to
Yeah.
become a sangoma, a shaman, spirit person of Southern Africa, you really need to get the tuasa, and it's not a cute thing. And what happens as they tell it, and I was talking to someone who went through this the other day, who went through the tuasa and is now an initiated sangoma of that tradition. You get the illness, it goes on for quite some time, and the way you get out of it is that you move from being a patient to becoming an apprentice and an initiate. And your dreams will show you the teacher and healer you need to work with. And they'll eventually bring you to that teacher and healer. And if it's the right one, they'll have been dreaming of you. And you're now together and you're now on a track of becoming someone different. I
Yeah.
love the idea that the illness is the invitation to initiation and that you move beyond. Joseph Campbell said we move beyond sickness into health when we move beyond sickness into myth. They're saying you move beyond sickness into health when you move to initiation, which is perhaps a very similar idea. The
Same way.
patient becomes the initiate. So this is common in the history of shamanic initiations. But let's pause on the word for a moment, because actually Aboriginal words don't say shaman. It's a Central Asian word. We're all
Yes.
using it.
Yeah.
Native American languages in North America where I live say dreamer. The most common word for the shaman in native North America means dreamer. In the Mohawk language, which I had to learn because of my dreams, it's Razedzots, which means one who dreams, implying one who dreams a lot, one who travels in dreams, one who can guide souls because he or she knows the paths of the dreaming. I like that. So for me, the word dreamer said with meaning, not necessarily with a capital D, but with meaning, the
Yeah.
word dreamer is the best description of the shaman in the aspect of the shaman that I think, for me anyway, is most important. And we know when we look at the literature, when we travel cross-culturally, that although there are many ways that shamans are made, there might be a family lineage, there might be horrible ordeals and initiations, there might be a vision quest, but the dominant way that the shaman is made is that he or she is called in dreams and practices essentially as someone who can shift consciousness at will and travel in and out of another world, a world of spirits, in a way that we can call dreaming. Dreaming
Yeah.
is the primary qualification and calling, in addition with the crisis of illness, of the true shaman, I would say.
This is
And
what
Jung, in
you
that sense, fits the term shaman.
this is what you wrote. Everyone who dreams is a little bit shaman.
Yes.
I like that. And
I borrowed that one from an Amazonian people called the Kagwahit. That's what they say. I think it's also true that all of us stand on the edge of this power. If
yeah,
if we begin to recognize what's going on in dreams, I believe it is accessible to some degree to everyone. You just as the ability to go down a mountain on skis is accessible to everyone. It doesn't mean that you and I are going to be Olympic skiers. It means that we have a chance, we have a shot, we have the territory open to us.
yeah. Robert, I'm wondering whether we can get back then. So, okay, you had all this illness, just doing that short recap. But then you became conscious, it seems to me. That's what you were saying at 9 or so. But then how did you, well, what's the word for it? How did your path kind of open up to be more
I don't know.
involved in
Well,
dreams?
there's a question before that one, John, if I might say. How did I survive?
Right.
I'm living in a very conservative era with a good family,
Yeah.
but they don't understand this. They're trying to support me and help me.
Yeah.
I'm a big kid. I could have been very physically strong. I'm a real Australian sporty guy, but because I have double pneumonia 12 times between the ages of 3 and 11, I'm
Yeah.
not exactly out there on the footy field or whatever as much as I might be. I
Yeah.
favor solitary sports like swimming or like running or like tennis played one-on-one. So I'm not really part of the scene, and I find that if I try to talk about this to most people, I am in trouble.
Yeah.
I'm going to be misunderstood or mocked. So I
So,
learned to hide it, but use it. But
yeah.
nonetheless, it guides choices that I make. It guides studies I take up as a student. It guided my very early appointment as a lecturer in ancient history at the ANU. I was all of 21,
Yeah.
400 students. I'm 21 years old. But
Yeah.
I was dreaming the ancient world. I used to sleep with dictionaries of Greek and other things by my bed. My Greek never became very good, but I had to work with my dreams. And then I go into the world and various things happen and then track forward. And I'm using it. I'm using it to track. I mean, I can see some things before they happen, not everything, but it's common knowledge for me, my common knowledge, that we see events of the future in dreams, and not just things that will happen,
You
but things
were
that
you
might.
were a bit in the closet, we might say.
I was, but to some extent, I mean, I've always talked about this to intimates. Hard to do as a kid, but as I got older and made friends of my choice in different places,
Yeah.
and I always used it. I used it, and the biggest mistakes of my life came when I forgot to use it and wasn't letting my dreams be my compass.
Okay.
One thing I understood very early on, which was difficult for Jung, he got it later on. I understood that dreams involve our relationship with time, that we do see the future, and not just in the to me rather boring and routine sense that we see events before they happen, but in the sense that we see versions of possible future scenarios. And if we can learn to use that information, we can do better, make wiser choices. And I came to learn working with this for a very long time. In a sense, we also generate events that will manifest in our lives in the course of the dreaming. And funnily enough, This is an idea that you find in indigenous cultures as well. I mean, the Zuni of the Southwest, the Quiche Mayas of Central America, they talk about dreams as if a dream event is both real and not finished until a physical event proceeds from it. The physical event begins in the dream. The two are connected. So I find that idea in indigenous cultures as well as other ideas, including quantum mechanics. One thing I knew from my early experiences, which Jung was very conscious of throughout his life, is we talk to the departed in our dreams, interact with them. They want things from us, we receive things from them. It's it's open. I mean, you're talking about porosity. It is porous. There is the swing door between life and death. It's not very hard to open if you become a dreamer who's willing to entertain the conversations. So I've known that all my life. I mean, it might sound morbid, but it's not. I've talked to people who've died to this world all my life. And in terms of my family and in terms of my relations, in particular with my father, this has been of enormous importance. My father and I became great allies after his death, and he became a family counselor for other members of my family in addition to me, and he took me on tours of what he's experiencing in his transitions. And this in midlife was another immense discovery connected with my Australian origins, that my Aussie father, the Australian Army colonel, had now become a dreamer on the other side, and loving his boy, wanted to share with his boy messages for the family today and pictures of what is possible in the transition stages
But
after death.
Robert, I think this is so important because, you know, we were speaking a little bit before we started, just for a couple of minutes, but sometimes, you know, as you know, I'm a little bit involved with Jungian psychology, and it seems to me that dreams can be approached very technically and, you know, this is your anima, this is your animus or whatever. But this, I remember James Hillman saying Jung opened the mouth of the dead when he wrote that Red Book. And to me, that's what you're talking about, the ancestry, the ancestors, um, the opening the mouth of the whole of, you know, history in a way too. So it's kind of like, this is where an understanding of Indigenous culture also brings a wider understanding of dreams, it seems to me.
Yes, I think that's very well put, John. Thank you. I think the ancestors are always calling to us, especially in dreams. And when I say ancestors, I mean it in three ways. Perhaps the Aboriginal sense of the ancestors is the fourth way. But the three ways I think of it are our bloodline ancestors, ancestors going back all the way through the generations. Then the ancestors of the land where we live or travel, who might or might not be connected. And then the ancestors of the cultures, peoples, traditions that are related to our spiritual life, members, if you like, of our multidimensional family, of our soul family across time and space, which is why sometimes we receive dream visitations or we have visits to people who belong to cultures we don't initially even recognize or understand. One of my first public dream workshops, like 35 years ago now, a woman tells a dream in which she's confused. I guess she's a recovering Catholic, and she looks a bit like a communion table, but not set up quite the same way, and people are sitting around it. And they've got loaves of bread with crosses, but they're equal-armed crosses. And the people are in strange get-up. Someone's wearing the head of a bird. Is that a raven or a crow? And someone's wearing a Roman soldier's helmet, and so on. And I realized as she unfolded, she's describing the possible scene of a Mithraic get-together, the Mithraic mysteries, to which we are told women were not invited, though there might have been a female counterpart that isn't in the documents. It looks as if she's in a scene related to the mysteries of Mithras. She has no idea who Mithras is, but she's right there. And you have to feel at that moment, okay, collective unconscious, very good. But why is it coming through to her? Well, perhaps it's coming through to her. You can go past life if you like, and that might be part of the story. But maybe, to keep it simple and general, maybe it's happening because she has a spiritual connection. Some part of her in her larger self, in her larger soul family, I would say, has that connection, has been through that. It's become relevant to her again, so it's coming through. So that's another sense in which the ancestors might always be with us and always calling, especially in dreams, when our left brain inhibitions
Yeah.
and sensors are often down, right?
And I notice in reading, your books that you have a few of them really, because the Neoplatonists, the maybe some of that Irish heritage, the Iroquois, the Australian Aboriginal. So, uh, maybe the way I would put it, we have these unique strains of things that speak to us, isn't it? Like I find I connect or respond very strongly to Neoplatonism. It
Oh,
talks
yes,
to
me
me.
too. Yes, me too. I mean, I dreamed the other day that Sosipatra, who I'm not sure I'd ever heard of, or didn't remember anyway, who was a woman philosopher in like Hypatia of Alexandria, but less well known. She's a woman philosopher in what is now Syria. That I saw Sosipatra dancing with her divine double. We're now deep into the Neoplatonist philosophy. And I was so moved by the scene. And then I went and researched Sosipatra. I discovered that there's a recent biography of her and off and running. So there we are at the heart of Neoplatonist teaching with a person who was relatively obscure to me. As I say, I'm not sure I'd heard of it before. I might have. I mean, I've read a lot of books. But the dream brought it so vividly alive in this beautiful, stately dance between a Neoplatonist woman philosopher who had her own school and her double on a higher level. Lovely stuff. Yeah, but maybe we are connected to everything that's human. I mean, maybe we're connected to all life on the planet in a world where everything is alive and conscious if we'll only wake up and listen. One thing I remember hearing early on, I think I found it in books, but I heard it before I read it in books, is that Aborigines say we live in the speaking land, that everything is alive and conscious and is speaking if you'll listen. If you listen, the goanna is speaking, the
Yeah,
river is speaking,
yeah.
the bird is speaking, the Toyota is speaking if you'll just pay attention.
The
It's all alive.
Toyota.
A Toyota, yes, I actually saw
Okay,
this.
I'll keep that
I
in
saw.
mind, Robert.
I heard this from an auntie, from an Aboriginal auntie, not long ago. She said, "Oh, even the Toyota's got its dreaming, mate." Just listen up, don't shrug. She didn't say don't shrug off the Toyota, but I was stunned to hear her say, even the Toyota's got its streaming, mate. So
Mm.
it's all alive and conscious. So maybe we're connected to everything. If you're a bodhisattva, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not necessarily accurate on this, but if you're a bodhisattva, I think one of your characteristics is you can remember you're connected to all life, all human life in particular. You have been all these people, including Hitler and Stalin and so on. And you can cope with that and not be overwhelmed by it and still go on and do your job of helping to bring people along. Well, most of us are not bodhisattvas, sorry. Most of us don't have that ability to remember the content of all the lifetimes we might be connected to, but we might be able to cope with a few. And my working practical, I try to be practical about these things, John. My working practical hypothesis is that we go through life, we learn more about our connection with stories from this culture or that, this time or that, as they become relevant, as we can use them and integrate them and cope. I was almost swamped by the memories that came to me when I started dreaming that I was called by a Native American medicine woman, and Arondiwano, a woman of power who lived close to 300 years ago. She has a historical identity. I found it. And the reason I was drawn to her, I believe, is that I have a connection, a slight blood connection, but a connection of affinity with an Irishman that came
Yeah,
to the American colonies in the 1700s,
yeah.
and lived wild and made it with the Mohawk. I mean, he became the Mohawk's white man
He had
more
he
than
had quite a few children, I understand,
he
Robert.
had quite a few children. He's said
Like,
to have had over 100 children. And I had the moment. His name was Sir William Johnson in his glory days. He became King's Superintendent of Inn. So he's an Irishman who became a King's man. Still an Irishman. He'd have his pipers playing for him, in his big house in the Mohawk Valley. And he stayed on the frontier. He didn't go back and live on his rents like other people did. But anyway, because of him, and I think because of my deep connection with him, people of that culture, the Native American culture, the Iroquois culture he knew so well, came for me in the dreaming and pulled me in. And I got to know their descendants in waking life, and they helped me to understand the words that I was dreaming, though I gave them words. I was dreaming an archaic vocabulary that no longer survives in the modern language. Anyway, in the course of all that, I was invited by a grandmother of the Turtle clan, of the Mohawk people, the Kanyakahaka, the people of the stone, to do a workshop at a Native American reservation in Ontario for 50 Mohawk speakers who'd never invited a non-Mohawk before. So there I am. This is the reverse of cultural appropriation, right? This is someone trying to help restore something to the extent that Aussie, who's dreamed into this stuff. I was invited because they said to me, you're dreaming the way our ancestors did, and we need to get it back. Please come and help us. So I'm there, and we're doing a workshop. It's a very moving workshop. It's a very deep workshop. It's profound. And at lunch, I'm sitting at a table, and across the table are two beautiful Mohawk women, and they're the lineal descendants of Sir William Johnson, the guy I dreamed about, and the only woman who ever tamed him, who was known to whites as Molly Brandt. Gunwatsitsiani was a Mohawk name. They're sending flowers for her. I'm sitting in front of two women whose surnames are Johnson and Brandt, lineal descendants, after 7 generations or more, of the people with whom I seem to have an ancestral connection, of whom I dreamed and who dreamed to me. It was one of those loops in life which is beyond, raising goosebumps. It's a sense, there's a sense of completion. There's a sense of logic and poetic rhyming across time and across centuries.
Exactly.
So that's part of my story too, and part of what makes me the kind of dreamer that I am.
Robert, I feel that, yeah, I love all that, and your connection with that. I feel we've missed a little bit of your life, though, in the sense that, okay, you started having lots of dreams when you were a young boy in Australia or whatever. You became the university professor. Then I understand you wrote a couple of books, didn't you? So kind of how did you make it to upstate New York from Fortitude Valley and
Fortitude Valley. Well, I went to London. I got a very, very nice Commonwealth scholarship to do my PhD in England. I got bored with that. I left. I got a job at The Economist magazine. I became a very successful, if controversial, journalist for a few years, wrote books about that. Then I turned what I'd learned as a journalist, the guy in the trench coat who's hanging out in shady bars with shady characters, etc., into some spy novels, some spy thrillers, made a certain amount of money, a lot for me in those days, and decided, well, that's all very well, but I'm bored with this too. I need to go and do something else, learn the land. So
how
I
old were
found
you? How
peace.
old were you when this happened, Robert?
Well, I was 33 when my first novel became a #1 international bestseller.
Right.
And within 1 year, I nearly went to Nigeria to be trained and initiated as a Babalawo of Ifa, the witch
Yeah.
doctor of the Yoruba tradition, because I had a connection there. And, I realized my family would fall apart completely if I did this. And although it was a valid connection, I better not do it just yet. But I seized my moment a few years later. I was thinking, I'm living in North America now. I'm sort of rootless. I've lived in Australia, the UK. I feel I'm in America. Where do I find my roots? Where do I hear the land? So I found myself with the woman who had become my wife, driving north of New York City into the upper Hudson Valley, edge of traditional Mohawk Indian country, which is what led on to the stories we were telling earlier.
Yeah.
And there's a rundown farmhouse, a lot of land, including a lot of wild wood that's never heard an axe. I felt this might be right. And there's a white oak tree behind the house. And I sit down under the white oak thinking, this is crazy. I don't know anyone in this part of the world. It's beyond any commuter distance from New York City, where I was doing a lot of stuff at the time. There has to be some sign, and a red-tailed hawk comes circling overhead, sun glinting off her silver belly feathers, squalling at me in a language I feel I should be able to understand, and drops a feather between my legs. It's not the only reason I bought the land and the farmhouse, but it was sort
Yeah.
of the clincher. And it was on a night on that land, in that rundown farmhouse, sometime afterwards, after I'd been back to Ireland, say back to Ireland, because since I've always been part of Ireland, to walk the land where that man I talked about had been born and grew up. I come
Yeah.
back from Ireland, and I'm lying in my bed in the middle of the night. And this is something I teach people. Pay attention to that liminal space between sleep and awake, about which far too little is said in the literature and the how-to stuff. The hypnagogic state is prime time to enter into lucid dreaming, to have spiritual contact, to make creative connections, etc. So I'm just lying on my back on the bed. I've just recently come back from a long trip, and suddenly I'm floating out of my body, not exotic for me, as you will understand. And I'm rather enjoying the sensation of hovering and flying over the landscape. And I realized with mild surprise I have the wings of a red-tailed hawk adjusted to my size. Usually when I'm flying, I'm not aware of having anything like this or needing it, but it becomes part of the experience, so I can feel a little pain when I brush in my second body, in my subtle body, as I brush the dried up needles of a spruce tree. Heading north, I feel the pull of intention. And there in a cabin by the woods near what might be Montreal, but it's not clear that Montreal exists at this point, not in its modern form anyway, I have my first encounter with a marvelous elderly native woman who talks to me in a musical cadenced language, like lake water lapping wave upon wave, while stroking a beaded belt, a wampum belt showing a she-wolf and two humans. And I don't understand a word she's saying. I know it's important. I come back seized with its importance, knowing somehow I'll get more. If this is the start of a tutorial, an education, I'll get more. And I did. So she is a woman I call Island Woman in my books, including Dreamways of the Iroquois or Iroquois, which you've been reading. That is based on the Mohawk name for the Huron. She was born Huron. They call them the people of the island. It's a made-up name. Dewa Dokwas is a native name. Try that. Try to let that trip off your tongue.
I'll do that later.
And she became a teacher for me, and she taught me three things in particular. Three things. Let's make them three. She taught me that in her tradition, the most important thing to know about dreams, I think Mr. Jung would hear this well. I think he'd hear this well. The most important thing about dreams is they show you the secret wish of the soul, for which there is a word in the old language, old Iroquois named Ondinuk. It means the secret of the soul, especially is revealed in dreams. Contemporary Iroquois speakers didn't know that word. I found it in the Jesuit Relations, the 73 volumes of the reports the missionaries sent back
I
to.
think this is such an important point because sometimes, like if someone's a little bit classical Jungian again or a therapist, they might talk about the meaning of dreams. Yes, dreams speak to you, they give you meaning or whatever. Yeah, that's all cool. But this fact of the wishes that you have,
Yes.
I find that's a flavor or a slant that you're having, which is really important.
No contemporary Iroquois has said this what I'm about to say to you.
Mm.
It goes with what I quoted, but I did find it in the writings of Harriet Maxwell Converse, who was one of those anthropologists who broke the glass a century ago, talking with Iroquois elders. One of them said to her, if you don't attend to the wishes of your soul will leave you, you'll get sick and you will die.
Yeah.
So, which actually reflects a preoccupation in many indigenous cultures, which is that if you do not listen to what your deeper self, your soul is telling you to do, you are in trouble. This in itself might be a cause of soul loss, which is a term increasingly commonly understood to relate to a cause of many of our existential complaints, our chronic fatigue, our depression, etc., which can be occasioned by grief, trauma, and so on.
Any number of
Any number of things, but it might be occasioned simply by the fact that you're not following your dreams in the big
yes.
sense. You're not following your life dreams. You're not doing what your deeper purpose is. So that comes with the phrase wishes of the soul. Another thing she confirmed in my studies of the tradition, because I'm a bookish guy, I like to do my research. I'm a historian, former investigative journalist. Don't expect me not to check it, not to do fact checking, not to do the work. And I found that in the records we see again and again, I heard this from contemporary Iroquois. But in the records, again and again, we see their dreamers seeing the future, scouting the future, going to find where the game animals can be easily hunted. So they become the dream hunters, going to see where the enemy is on the warpath in a time of conflict and getting it right. And we see them even developing really interesting apotropaic methods to turn away not just bad dreams, but bad events. For example, a Mohawk war captain, this is from the 1600s, it's in the Jesuit records, the Jesuit relations. He dreams his village is attacked by enemies, burnt, his people are killed. He himself is fire tortured to death. So what does he do? First of all, he tells it to the community, get the bad dream out, see what can be done. Then he requests the community to tie him to a stake, to burn him with red-hot knives and axes, short of death, but to act out enough of the dream to prevent the fullness of the dream from manifesting. I'm not recommending this as a way of containing possible evil scenarios. It's extreme. The Mohawk tended to be extreme. They wanted to make quite a show of their capacity to deal with their enemies, and they were willing to pay a price themselves. But so there we get something about dreaming from a culture on the edge of survival, being ravaged by smallpox, by alcohol, by war. We need this to get through. Dreaming will get us through. It will show us things we need to understand and do in regular life.
I think the idea that it's practical, that maybe hunters wouldn't go out one day if the dream didn't kind of endorse the whole endeavor.
John, that is what you just said is so important. When we talk about indigenous cultures, and forgive us everyone as white people who've grown up relatively affluent compared to most indigenous people for even doing so. Yeah. But when we look at what we can learn from indigenous cultures and celebrate and honor in them, one of the things is this. They have understood and continue to understand, they haven't been completely suppressed, that dreaming is about soul and it is about survival. These are not contradictory. To serve the purposes of the soul is a practical thing to do. If you don't serve the purpose of the soul, you'll end up doing maybe irreparable harm to yourself and others. You could even become one of those hollow men who go around doing so much destruction in their world because they're not connected to what matters. And it's about survival. It will get you through. It will show you where your enemy lies in ambush on the warpath. It will show you where to get food for your people in the starving time.
Or the state of your physical body, perhaps.
Absolutely.
And your health.
Absolutely. And let me just pull back from all of this, the general point.
Yeah.
And I'll illustrate it by saying what an elder from Onondaga, the Mohawk are one of a confederacy of 6 nations called the Confederacy of the Longhouse, the Haudenosaunee.
Yeah.
And when I was dreaming up a storm with the woman in the cabin up north and with other things that were happening, because dreaming is about synchronicity, not just about what happens with your eyes closed, but what happens with your eyes open. Yeah. Anyway, an elder from Onondaga, the traditional capital of the 6 nations, talked to me. He wanted to talk. He asked to talk to me. And I told him my dreams, and he said, with great, simple intent, "Oh, you've made some visits, and you've had some visitations. Let's dwell on this for a moment. This is the oldest understanding of dreams on the planet, I believe. Yeah. Visits and visitations. What do we say? Dreaming is traveling. Your soul, which Senzake Hultkrantz, a lot of anthropologists have called your free soul, travels beyond your body in dreams. It goes on adventures. It gets around. It has social interaction with other people who may be dead or alive, human or non-human, and you receive visitations from others traveling in the same way." To the extent that Western psychology still doesn't get this, I think Jung got it. He probably didn't write about it quite this openly, but I think he got it. But to the extent that Western psychology doesn't get this, it's missing what is at the very heart of the dream adventure. Yeah. You made some visits and you received some visitations. Back in the 19th century, Sir Edward Tyler, first professor of anthropology at Oxford, whose work Primitive Culture everybody needs to read, even though the language is hard to put up with today. Colonialist, racist, superior upper crust, and he's armchair anthropologist sitting in his Oxford study reading books and not getting in the field. Nonetheless, Tyler is indispensable because he said this. He said in beautiful, colorful language from which I will retain only the key phrase. He said, when we look, at our understanding of these things, And he's talking about the fact that dreams show you that the soul exists because the soul travels beyond the body. Thereby, dreams become the basis of the understanding there is an afterlife, because if soul travels beyond the body, then it can survive death. Thereby, dreams become the source of religion. He's saying all of this while attributing it to savage people of lower races. As I say,
Yeah.
the language is really, really abominable today. But he's a Victorian writing in 1870. Then
I
he
would like
says,
to. I would like to just throw something in there
let me
quickly.
just finish. Let me just,
Yeah,
that's the last
you go
phrase,
for it.
John. Then I'll give you the floor. Sorry, but there's the last
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah, that's
He
all right.
says, when we look at this understanding of things, is it possible that our men of science, of the highest science, have fallen far below the high level of savage knowledge?
Yeah,
Have fallen below the high level of savage knowledge. So he's saying in his Victorian vocabulary, is it possible we have forgotten fundamental things that indigenous people, that the ancient dream shamans understood? And I would say he was right in asking that question.
yes, absolutely. I just wanted to add that, that's very much a part of Australian Aboriginal culture and the travelling. And, perhaps that's our kind of, that's how I see religion in Australia. It's coming from there. That's how I would describe religion. It's about that travelling. And as you say, within the confines of psychology, sometimes these are the things which are just excluded. We need to widen out to understand this kind of thinking. But I want to ask you something else, Rob, because you've taken a lot of dream groups, you've worked with a lot of people. The idea of lucid dreaming, of like for example, I think you can see a lot about Jung in the time when he wrote the Red Book, and he had the conversations with Philemon and Salome, and uh, when I call him permeable, he could have those conversations. I think I want to ask you two questions: is what have you learned from taking all of those people about, with regard to dreams? But secondly, what about when some of us say the lucid dreaming, the active dialogue, I think Jung called it, the talking to dream figures or whatever. Some of us find that a little bit harder than others. So how do you approach it? And what have you found over the years?
Well, if I understand the first question, it loops us back to something we were talking about earlier. Everyone has access to this material to some
Yeah,
extent. Everyone is a dreamer to some extent.
yeah,
We are not perhaps born, or we do not necessarily grow up to be dreamers in the same depth or the same depth of practice. I mean, there's a difference recognized in indigenous societies between the initiate, the adept, the made man, the clever man, the spirit woman, and the other dreamers. But nonetheless, anybody who dreams, to go back to that quote earlier, is a little bit shaman, a little
yeah,
bit on the edge of his power. So you might start out ahead of others because in a sense it's born with you. Something has come back or come through you beyond what is available to others. If you into reincarnation, you could say that the whole history, the whole lineage, the whole order,
yeah,
to some extent is with you. But then it's going to be practice, 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 isn't it? You're going to practice this. If you're going to be a good dreamer, for example, you'll have to keep a journal, and you have to keep it industriously over a long time. I've been keeping a detailed journal. Actually, everything goes into my journal now, not just dreams, but everything. My notes, what I'm reading, my experience of synchronicity, everything goes in. But, I've been recording every day for 40 years now, and on and off since I was a teen. And those journals are the most important books I will ever read or ever write. Moshe Eliade said something similar. He said actually his ideal book would be an endless journal. He was one of those great journalists too. So if you don't keep a journal in detail, in depth, you're not on your way here. I mean, okay, it's indigenous people who are non-literate or pre-literate might say, well, white people are writing things down because your memories are blown. Well, no one is going to remember all this stuff in detail. Keep a journal over time. Your practice will grow. You'll have your own dictionary of symbols. You'll have your own scientific record of supernormal phenomena, to revive an old word like precognition, clairvoyance, etc. You'll have it there documented in front of you. As far as lucid dreaming is concerned, many of my friends write books about lucid dreaming. I called my first book on all this conscious dreaming. It was back in those days. It was published in 1996. Gosh, it's a long time ago, John. Hard to believe, but it is.
Yeah.
Back in those days, a lot of the stuff being put out about lucid dreaming seemed jejune adolescent, be master of the universe, have sex with anybody, this kind of stuff, and or control your dreams, can manipulate your dreams. I really didn't like that because I understood that dreams are wiser than the waking mind sometimes. I didn't like the idea of setting the control freak in the ego in charge of the vast ocean of dream experience. So I read about conscious experience. Now I look at it, 30 years later, more or less, the important thing about how you approach different states of consciousness is not whether you are lucid or not in the way the word is being termed, but whether you are intentional or volitional or not, by which I mean the important thing is whether you are aware that you have choice and that you are conscious of your ability to make a choice and that you do make choices. If you go about in dreams or in waking life for that matter, telling yourself, I don't have any choice, I've got to do this, I'm just going to go on that road, there's no other road, you're in trouble. So the thing is to be aware that you have choice at every turning, whatever state you're in. And then the other thing to aspire to anyway is continuity of consciousness. I mean, this is what the people who are really into sleep yoga and dream yoga talk about. And I'm with them on this. Continuity of consciousness, in other words, retain some ability to bear witness to yourself, to retain awareness, whatever state of mind and reality you are in. So as you enter the sleep dream phase, be aware of the transition. As you come out of it, be aware, stay aware. The best platforms for lucid dreaming, to get practical, that I know are ones that many of the lucid dream advocates don't talk about enough. The first is the immense fertile liminal space of hypnagogia, the space between sleep and awake, recognized in the mystery traditions, go back to a place that you love, as prime time. Iamblichus, the theurgist and Neoplatonist of Syria in late antiquity, Iamblichus described as if in his book on the mysteries as if it's the God space, the space where you really expect contact with the algoides, with the shining spirit of the masters. And I'm a bit the same way about it. Not just before you fall asleep. That might be the weakest time to do it because you might be tired, might have had a few drinks. Maybe in the middle of the night when you're drifting, or maybe the morning especially, hypnopumping, you're coming into dreams.
Robert, one thing I want to say is, having grown up in the world, the secular world of the to-do list and what did Jung call directed thinking or whatever, that I've found one of the biggest joys has been over the years. For me, I like the mornings, but enjoying the liminal space of the mornings where there's where the unconscious is very, I've forgotten the words you used, but the unconscious is very much in play. It's like even if one wants to write, one doesn't have to be so consciously directed, just to let things come,
Yes. It's lovely if you can give yourself permission and the freedom to laze in bed in the morning, whatever time you wake up. Okay, you go to the bathroom or whatever, you might have a cup of coffee, go back to bed and see what comes. You might be able to go on with the dream that is somewhat gone, but not altogether gone. Can I tell you a story about this, how this works going on in the dream? Okay, so this is one of the big moments in my life in terms of a spiritual conversation, a conversation that made me feel I was getting towards the place where it's at.
Yeah.
So I'm asleep and dreaming in a cabin on a lake in Vermont. And I'm having a nice lunch with a very elegant couple who come from the East. I mean, their style is of the East, like Iran, like Persia, beautifully dressed. We have a very nice conversation. I've had enough lunch. I get up to leave. And in the dream, an old friend of mine, who was a bit of a rabbi, a bit of a teacher to me earlier on, mentor, comes running after me, huffing and puffing. Robert, did you forget you were supposed to record the conversation? He gives me a big manila envelope, and I wake up thinking, what, record the conversation? I'm lying there, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, there's light coming through the slats of the Venetian blind. Oh, and what's this envelope? Oh, I'm lying in my bed. I've got an envelope which is in my physical hand. I do have a yellow legal pad which I used in those days to make notes. Okay, I'll stay with the dream. I'll go back in the dream. So I'm re-entering the dream. Note the phrase I'm using, dream re-entry. This is one of my favorite techniques. Go back inside a dream.
Yeah.
I'm just doing it in bed. And I go back to the table, and there they are, Prince and Princess from the East. And I open the envelope. I'm wide awake. I'm wearing my body on the bed. I'm with them at the same time. They're more real than the body on the bed, but it's by location in both places. And I take the things out of the envelope, and one is a newspaper clipping from the Tehran Times, and it says, "The Prince and Princess of Fars, F-A-R-S, are traveling abroad." Well, I know that's an old name for the Persian heartland. So we're getting into old Persian territory, which is another of those scenes that calls me from time to time. And I look at another document, it's a list of 20 questions. It begins, what is the nature of exile? Number 2, what are the conditions for return? And I know these questions are about the soul, where it comes from, how it recovers its source and its purpose. And I put the questions to the Prince and Princess of the East, and I know his name is Shams, which means sun, which is the name of Rumi's teacher, but I don't think this is Rumi's guy. I think this is another guy who uses the name.
Right.
And I start on the bed writing the answers. And I write the answers to 8 of the questions, and I succeed in writing 13 of the questions. Then I'm out of pencil.
You mean
then
just totally as it comes? You mean totally as it comes?
As it comes, as it comes. Okay, you know, I'm a novelist. Amongst other things, I have an imagination, but there is a transpersonal authority to this encounter, which to me is unquestionable, as Jung felt in the presence of Philemon, right? Philemon is the character who made him believe in the objective reality of figures of the psyche, as he wrote. It is absolutely, as incontrovertibly authoritative as an experience, a sense of objective experience as that. These are not projections of some aspect of myself. They might be related to myself with a big Jungian S, but they have their own presence. The questions are for real. Okay, some part of me beyond my ordinary understanding might have scripted the questions. I now have them. So I write down 13 of the questions with the body on the bed, the yellow legal pad. I record 8 of the answers. Now I've had it. I'm exhausted. I go outside. I go down to the floating dock in the lake, and I get on the floating dock. And as the dawn rises, it's hard to tell whether the lake is in the sky and the sky below me. It's one of those moments. It's one of those beautiful moments when you know that you have transcended. Talk about permeable. I know I have transcended all those normal veils and walls between the worlds. But the reason I'm telling it now, other than I just felt like delivering it, is that it is an example of dream reentry. So this is lucid dreaming. It probably goes beyond most definitions or understanding of what lucid dreaming is. But the portal, the entry point, the launch pad is that you have a dream which has energy for you, mystery. It might be terror, it might be pleasure, it might be adventure, it might be the need to dialogue with someone in the dream space, which is a very good reason for going back inside, and you use your own dream, your own image as the portal. In some versions, yeah.
Do you do that in your workshops and things like that?
Oh, all the time, yes. This is core technique. This is active dreaming 101. I made up the phrase active dreaming to describe what I teach, as it refers to the synthesis of modern dream work and traditional shamanic methods for journeying, not hallucinogenics, none of that. We do use drumming and nature sounds and water recordings and so on to power and focus the experience. And
well, if you decide to use hallucinogenics, you better get more pads, more yellow pads.
I've never had any interest. You see, I've never had any difficulty.
Well, some people have got a little, maybe more naturally that way inclined anyway, perhaps, let's say. So that would be the last thing they want to do.
It's become very, very okay, very acceptable in many sectors of our society. New Age movement, holistic treatments. You get all sorts of courses in what hallucinogens are right for you. I don't judge other people. It works for you. Fine, I don't mind. But I've never had any difficulty leaving my body and shifting consciousness, John. My difficulty has been staying in the body. So
yeah.
I've had the opposite challenge. I've had the opposite challenge. I mean, absolutely the opposite challenge. And that, of course, is the gift and the challenge of those childhood experiences.
Yes. Robert, just I know we're getting towards the time, but tell me one other thing from all those years running dream workshops. So you've given a very good method there, I think. I like that, and about the writing. And I just want to say one other thing. When I used to teach meditation a long time ago, I realized that like some people are very visual and they'll have very visual experiences, and you can feel a little bit intimidated by their visual or their visions or whatever. But I find with writing, it's very feeling oriented, and that suits me, you know, the way that something like a gnosis can come through or whatever, or some knowledge. So I like that there's different modalities, and writing is one that opens the channel. But what's one other method? What's the one other single method which you've found helps people with their dreaming and to understand their own dreaming?
Well, what is very helpful is have a way of sharing whatever you've got with other people that makes it fun and makes you feel encouraged and rewarded for having a dream in the first place. One of the reasons why Dreamwork is still not a really popular movement anywhere is that by and large people have no idea how to share a personal story or give feedback in the right way or move to action. Probably the most important thing I brought to this field is what I call the lightning dreamwork process. I don't know whether you've read about that in any of my books yet, but it's absolutely central to every class I lead. It's a 4-step process. You tell me a story. You've got it doesn't have to be a dream, be a story from any part of your life. You give it a title. And as you get to do that and learn to drop all the autobiography, all the self-containment, etc., you are beginning to emerge as a storyteller, which is a great gift. You're beginning to learn how to tell your story so others will want to hear it. This is great power, generally lost in our society. So if I'm your guide and I'm getting you to tell me a dream or a story, long or small, helping you to shape it, tell it clearly, give it a title, that's step one. And there's power in that. I'm giving you power. I'm giving you your space. You're claiming your voice. Then I'm going to ask you 3 essential questions.
Yeah.
What are your feelings around this? Your first feelings. Don't spend all day. What are your first feelings around this? After the dream, more than inside it, because your first feelings after the dream will
Quick
be a guidance. Yes.
association. Yeah.
Well, feelings at this point. Then we go to the reality check, and this might include quick associations. What do you recognize from this in the rest of your life, any part of your life? And could any part of it manifest in the future, literally or symbolic? That question too, because Western psychology is still missing again and again and again. A core issue for Indigenous dreamers and ancient dreamers. What can you see of the future and how are you going to use it? Final question will be, what is your question? What's your curiosity? Then I'm going to say to you, and the etiquette is all important at this point, if it were my dream, if it were my life, if it were my story, here's what I would think. And this point I can lay on you any associations I have, because they're my projections, I've said so. You don't have to take them on board. And then finally, and this is critical, what action are you going to take now? What are you going to do to embody energy from the dream, or to use its guidance, or to avoid that accident on the road next Tuesday, or to make it up with that friend, or to talk to your departed grandma? And then maybe for temporary closures, part of step 4, can you give me a bumper sticker? Can you make up a personal mantra, a one-liner, a snapper, Mark Twain would say, that harvests the energy of the dream? Now, you learn this, and of course you can round it out and do a quick version. You have a process which makes it fun and rewarding to tell your story to someone else. You enjoy it. You're now motivated to do more of it. If you don't have a dream, you bring something else to the table. And you learn, of course, that you can look at the world around you as a set of signs and symbols that will speak to you like dreams if you're paying attention, and you play with those too. So these are some of the ways that we get better at remembering and using our dreams. We make it socially rewarding, we make it fun, we recognize we build much more interesting relationships by doing this kind of thing. So this is what I do in any class I lead. That's one of the core techniques.
I think that's wonderful, Robert. I like that. And yeah, I'll thoroughly recommend your books, and I'm going to put your webpage up so that people can refer back to these things. And from me, there's one last thing that I'd like to add. I very much liked reading when you're talking about understanding yourself as the dream expert. I think, one of the reasons why we might get, or in the past, let's say, turned off from sharing is that people have kind of superimposed their theory too much on what we dreamt, because after all, it's our dream, and let us become our own experts. I enjoyed reading that piece that you wrote on that. So I want to thank you very much. I know there's a lot we could. There's endless. It's bottomless, the path to the soul. I think Heraclitus said it's like you never reach the bottom.
Never reach the boundaries of the soul. No, indeed you don't. No, it's been great fun being with you, John. It's wonderful through you to connect with my native land, and as I say, the land very specifically where I was conceived and where I was seen to be about to die at age 3. I mean, these are great connections, and you're a splendid fellow, and I love your openness and enthusiasm. And I share your passion for Jung. I'm not a Jungian. Jung wasn't a Jungian himself, but he was a great, great mind in motion. I mean, a tremendous mind. I've actually written about an encounter with Jung in his possible afterlife situation in a book of mine called Mysterious Realities. I invite you as a lover of Jung to take a look at that and see how you feel.
I'll have a look at it. And
the other Bollingen, he dreamed of another Bollingen in the last period of his life, and he told people, those close to him, he is now confident in his afterlife situation. Because he'd seen that he had a parallel place to his tower on the lake, waiting for him the other side. So this is an account of what life in the other Bollingen might be like.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thanks for sharing.
Okay. May your best dreams come true.